Hello, I'm Nicholas Henshall. I'm the Dean of Chelmsford, and I want to share here really a version of a talk I gave at Chelmsford Cathedral on the 15th of November on the theme of ordinary Christianity. It particularly picked up on one of the readings that we were reading from the letter to the Hebrews. I will need to read a little bit of this, so the odd glass will appear every now and then. So here are some words from chapter 10 of Hebrews. Let us consider how to provoke one another to love and good deeds, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. That great line, to provoke one another to love and good deeds. This, alongside other texts that we were reading on that Sunday morning, have a very strong sense about thinking at the end of time, the end of our lives, the end of the world, the second coming of Christ. They're huge themes, especially in the November season as we get towards Advent and look forward to the three comings of Christ at Christmas. And I think it's a really important thing about that word end, because it makes us ask a question: what's the point? That may sound a bit odd, but no, it seems to be it's the key question. The word end in Greek has the same meanings as it does in English. It can also mean purpose. So when we talk about endings, we're talking about purpose, about why we do this stuff, what it all adds up to, what is the point. The great management guru Stephen Covey has that extraordinary line, always begin with the end in mind. And in a sense, that's what November and December in the Christian calendar ask of Christians. Begin with the end in mind. What are you looking for? What's the point? What does discipleship add up to? What does it mean to be a follower of Jesus? Now, what answer does the New Testament give to that? I mean, on the reading of the words and deeds of Jesus, it doesn't look promising, does it? Are we going to be rich? No, says Jesus unequivocally. Are we going to be successful? No, says Jesus unequivocally. Are we going to be happy even? Well, no, says Jesus unequivocally. It seems to me, blessed are those who lament, he says. And I think that's a much better translation than blessed are those who mourn. There's a very stark set of choices that Jesus seems to put before us. And it gets worse. I mean, again and again in the Gospels, Jesus says, actually, to follow me, to be a follower of Jesus, is going to mean suffering, disappointment, death, loss. So, the purpose question is really quite a harsh one when we come to encounter the words and deeds of Jesus in the New Testament. Inevitably, that makes the deeds and words of Jesus very uncomfortable for us. He invites us to choose poverty, never to retaliate, not to ask others to repay what they owe us. And faithful service doesn't actually lead to any reward. Here's Luke chapter 17, verses 7 to 10. Jesus said, "Who among you would say to your slave who has just come in from ploughing or tending sheep in the field, 'Come here at once and take your place at the table'? Would you not rather say to him, 'Prepare supper for me, put on your apron and serve me, while I eat and drink. Later you may eat and drink'? Do you thank the slave for doing what was commanded? So you also, when you have done all that you were ordered to do, say, 'We are worthless slaves. We have done only what we ought to have done.'" We are only worthless slaves. We have done only what we ought to have done. The call of Jesus extended to each one of us is, if you like, what C.S. Lewis used to call mere Christianity. What I guess what we often talk about in the clergy staff team here as ordinary Christianity, somewhere close to the heart of the gospel, what it means to be a follower of Jesus, not in a high exalted sort of state all the time, but in the timbre of our daily lives, in our words, in our deeds. What does it mean to follow Jesus? What does doing only what we ought to have done actually mean? The clue, I think, is in that line from chapter 10 of Hebrews, with which we began. Let us consider how to provoke one another to love and good deeds, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. Now, that certainly is beginning with the end in mind. It gives us some ideas on how to fulfill the purpose to and for which God has called us. The heart of the whole project, says Hebrews, is love. And that shouldn't surprise us. After all, in John's Gospel and in the letters, the words love and God are interchangeable. Indeed, grammatically, the line God is love could also mean love is God. Then Hebrews tells us something about the nature of that love, the outcome of that love. The outcome is good deeds. Good deed sounds a bit sort of Edwardian, doing the right thing. Well, oh dear, that sounds a bit too political today. This is not meant to be a kind of moral rearmament slogan, but it clearly is very fundamental to being any kind of Christian. I mean, in Matthew 25:33 to the end, which is the very last piece of teaching in Matthew's Gospel before Jesus enters his final week and suffering and death, Jesus says something quite extraordinary. He says, whenever you clothe the hungry, whenever you clothe the naked, or feed the poor, or visit those in prison, you are doing it to me. And he says more than that. He says, even if you don't know it's me, even if you don't even recognise Jesus, gosh, that act of service is powerful and brings salvation. So there's an extraordinary sense that what we used to call the corporal works of mercy, those bodily real things of doing service to other people, are fundamental to being a human being, and certainly fundamental to being a follower of Jesus. So, doing good deeds that make a genuine difference in people's lives. But let's be clear again. This is simply our response as followers of Jesus to the love of God. It's simply doing only what we ought to have done. Doing only what we ought to do. And it's not about brownie points in heaven. It's about our response to the love of God. Now, I'm delighted, in however small a way, here at Chelmsford Cathedral, that these good deeds happen. If you're here on a Wednesday afternoon, you'll find a group of quite marginal and peripheral people gathering in the North Transept and sharing cake and tea. A little offering, a little example of inclusion. I'm delighted that recently our work with young people with mental health issues has begun to expand, and just the other week some new work with Afghan refugee families began in the heart of the cathedral. These are little things, sure, but they're pointers to exactly what a Christian community should be doing in hidden and ordinary ways, the outcome of our worship, the outcome of our commitment to Christ being to do this stuff for others, not because it earns us any brownie points, but because it's what Christians do. It's what followers of Jesus are called to. That's simply what it means to be a Christian. So what helps tie all this together, the love and the good deeds? Again, Hebrews comes to our aid. If our purpose is love and good deeds are the outcome, Hebrews explains the bare minimum that we need to have in place if we're going to have a hope of living this out. Hebrews says, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another. This suggests that this Christian life, this being a follower of Jesus, needs discipline. It also shows us, maybe it's a good relief, that even in this time, in New Testament times, people weren't that good at coming to church enough. But, that's a discipline I think we ought to know. But that is at the heart of it. There are disciplines involved in this business of ordinary Christianity, and living our lives day by day as followers of Jesus in response to his love needs a discipline to make it real. Maybe these disciplines were less important when our culture was more explicitly Christian. That may have been the case. Whether that's true or not, they're essential today as Christianity across Europe has become once again the faith of a minority for the first time in 1,000 years. And indeed more than that, the challenges in our culture. Just last week we had the banning of the Lord's Prayer from all major cinemas in the country as part of trailers for a film in December. An extraordinary moment and a challenge to free speech, I'd suggest, not just faith. And it was a bit chilling again. Last week I was reading an article about Downton Abbey, of all things. I don't watch Downton Abbey and never have. And of course it's coming to an end with the Christmas special. But the producers recognised that they had actually removed an element of what would have been normal life in an Edwardian family, in that you never see the family pray together. Now that's extraordinary because, of course, it would have been part of their daily life at meal times and at other times. And indeed, 150 years ago, daily prayer at the home, I'm not pre the Edwardian period, this would have been kind of typical, not of devout Christians, but of ordinary Christians. It's part of ordinary Christianity, part of the normal warp and weft of Christian life, which the great amnesia of the last 70 years has really not helped us with at all. So let's just go through these basic disciplines. The first and most basic is Sunday worship. It may sound really obvious, but it needs to be stated again and again. A basic part of our discipleship is gathering together as a community, meeting Christ in the Word of God, meeting him in the sacrament of the altar, and then going out to live and serve as he has loved us. As church-going may not be sufficient for Christian discipleship, but it's absolutely necessary. I don't want to get into that whole business about can people be Christians without going to church. The word Christian means a member of the worshipping community. It doesn't mean a nice person or a good person. It simply means a follower of Jesus who is a member of the community called by his name. It's a sort of technical word in that sense. And ordinary Christianity starts there. We come here to church to be formed by God, having met with him, and to be sent out to live our lives in response. It's a constant cycle. It's a constant cycle. We gather in order to be formed, in order to be sent. And then we gather in order to be formed, in order to be sent. So for a follower of Jesus, Sunday worship isn't optional. It's one of those basic obligations we took on at our baptism, our confirmation, or when we came to adult faith. And it's about both the God whom we worship and the fellowship we share. What else? Well, I've referred to daily prayer, and that has been part of the normal life of Christians for most of the last 2,000 years. And I think it's really important to learn again the habit. Habits, if they're habit forming and the habits are good, are really important to our lives. And Christianity has spoken about that again and again and again. Ordinary Christianity, daily prayer as a fundamental element. Maybe it's using the big official forms like we do in church. Maybe just a very simple time of reflection as you sit in a massive traffic queue on the A12. I know somebody who plays psalms as they drive to work as a way of reflecting on the scriptures and enabling the day ahead. Maybe it's 10 minutes just spent reflecting on the gospel of the day. That's why we print the Bible references on the Sunday news sheet. Maybe using the Chelmsford holding cross. Maybe learning to pray with some Christians that we find at work. That can be extraordinarily powerful, although it may seem very risky. Maybe even coming along to the daily prayer in the cathedral. Now, it's really true that most contemporary followers of Jesus in the West have lost the habit of daily prayer, and that's a bit of a catastrophe. If Jesus and his friends needed that kind of discipline, then I'd suggest that we do too. How would we get basic nourishment to live out our faith day by day if we weren't opening our lives to God day by day? It would be as strange as assuming that eating one meal on a Sunday would be enough for the next 7 days. I mean, okay, I could do with losing a bit of weight, but that would dangerously endanger our health. And I suspect what we're doing with daily prayer is actually happening. We're seriously undernourished. And something about learning as part of this kind of, if you like, 3 cores: worship, fellowship and learning. How do we actually learn on the way of Christ? When I was young, my dad had a stint as an interim rector in a church outside San Francisco for 3 months. It was a beautiful, wonderful modern church building with amazing worship going on it. Next door was the parish, what we call the parish hall, the parish centre, with lots of space for social activities, used of course all through the week. And then there was a third building. And my dad was really puzzled by this. It had little classrooms or seminar rooms in it. And he said eventually to the church wardens, or the vestry, sorry, as it is in America, "What on earth is this building?" And they said, "Oh, that's the Sunday school." And he was really baffled. He said, "Gosh, you must have a lot of children." They said, No, Sunday school's for adults here. And that was the pattern on Sundays. People gathered for worship, moved through into the parish centre for fellowship, and then into the Sunday school to learn. All ages, all backgrounds, learning on the way of Christ so that they could actually put into action in their lives what they began to understand more deeply about what it meant to be a follower of Jesus. Now, we don't quite get that far here, and Breakfast with the Bible is a little hint along that way. I think the more capacity we can build for learning in our community, the deeper our discipleship can go, and I mean this the right way around, the more ordinary our Christianity can become. And when we've done all that, all this learning, all this praying, all this worship, well, as Luke says, we've done only what we ought to have done. And in fact, if it hasn't issued in the kind of service we then offer in the world, we're not even doing that. It's not a programme of self-improvement, this business of Christianity. It's not the acquisition of a bit of knowledge to feed our heads, or a taste for a certain kind of worship that draws us here. It's rather an opening to God as followers of Jesus that brings us here and sends us out to follow Jesus at home, at work, shopping, watching TV, walking the dog, talking to a friend. Hebrews again. Let us consider how to provoke one another to love and good deeds, not neglecting to meet together as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching, to provoke one another to love and good deeds.